Hello everyone, welcome to the PinkUn YouTube channel. Given Norwich City are back in the Championship now, I thought who better to get to speak about the division and also preview Norwich City's chances than to... I'm going to label you both as EFL gurus. I hope that's okay, just for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm sure you'll indulge no less. Benjamin Bloom, who's decided to go with an Ipswich Town scarf behind him, which I think is probably best to get out in the open straight away. And Gabriel Sutton, who hasn't committed to, is showing his allegiance on camera, which is absolutely fine. Guys, how are you both? It feels like, well, it's been probably a year really since we caught up with you.
You can call Gab an EFL guru. He's got that knowledge. I'll just go by Championship guru, and I'd like to also out Gab as an Ipswich Town fan. Now he's been an Ipswich fan all his life. He's there all the time. He's just not got his scarf up.
Yeah, I do love those boys in blue for sure.
Yeah, I think people will be able to probably guess. Well, they might narrow it down to a few clubs on your accent, maybe, but we shall see. Anyway, Norwich City.
I don't actually think I've got an accent, because I am from Birmingham, but I don't have a Birmingham accent, which most people say. So that's a funny thing, really. Yeah,
well, I often get told I have sort of a twinge of Norfolk. There's Norfolk every so often, but beyond that, it's pretty clear, which is probably quite a relief. Anyway, guys, I thought we'd catch up with you. Norwich City obviously got relegated last season from the Premier League. Some fans will be quite happy they're back in the Championship. Some guys or some supporters won't be particularly pleased. I think every fan wants to see their club compete at the highest level, don't they? But I think I wanted to start really with you guys by talking about what Norwich City have missed and what Norwich City fans have missed from the Championship, because it's been an eventful year, I think, for football and the world generally. But the Championship always does seem to be dramatic. I think we saw that from the final day. But when you're in the Premier League, and I think this is probably the only time you realise it, you perhaps see how little coverage the Championship gets, certainly in terms of the mainstream media, which is why you guys are so important in what you do, I think, to the supporters in those divisions. And Stuart Weber put it bluntly as well when he said, when you're in the Premier League, it's only when you're in the Premier League you realise how little people care about the Championship. So first of all, I'll ask you sort of a double-edged question. First and foremost, what have Norwich City fans missed from the Championship last season? And equally, why do you both love the division so much? We'll start with Ben.
What they missed last season, lots of the normal stuff. I always call it like the Premier League is like a beautiful flat race, horse race, you know, the sleek best horse wins, and the Championship is like the Grand National with 3-metre jumps. You have to do 2 laps of it, just complete insanity. What was very much different last season was the last time Norwich were here, there were 3 very good teams, Norwich, Sheffield United and Leeds, and whipping boys at the bottom of the table with Ipswich and Rotherham and Bolton. We had a nice, stretched, elongated table, how you would imagine it. This season, no, not at all. Leeds were excellent and won by 10 points in the end. Then you had West Brom, who had a very good manager and parachute payments. Then you had Fulham and Brentford, who were kind of good, but working towards being very good. And then you had this insanity at the bottom of the table with Luton and Barnsley and Wigan, who ended up going down through an FFP deduction, scoring just way, way more points than normal. You had a massively squashed up table, and Swansea, if they'd won the playoffs, would have been the lowest joint ever lowest scoring point scoring team to win the playoffs. So it was very much more squashed up, less quality at the top in terms of numbers of teams scoring a good number of points, much more quality down at the bottom. Hull were 8th at the turn of the year and went on a horrendous run and got relegated. And we will out Gab because his team looked completely safe under any other year and ended up just kind of 2 places off the bottom, above the line in terms of Birmingham. So, yeah, what I would say, normal chaos, but very much more squashed up rather than a stretched out table that you normally get. I don't know what your thought would be, Gab.
Yeah, I'd agree. It reminds me a little bit of the 12-13 season when basically the second half of the season, like the bottom half teams were pretty much in better form than the top half teams. And I think what you had for much last season was basically the top 5, I would say, looked pretty stable. And then there was always that question mark of whether which team's going to snatch that 6th spot. And in the end, actually, it was Nottingham Forest who dropped out because they were very poor after the restart. And even really since beating Leeds 2-0, they've kind of dropped off and probably they didn't really fight for a playoff spot in the same way that Cardiff were doing and I suppose Swansea were doing. But yeah, in terms of the outside players contenders, there are a lot of question marks about all those teams and a lot of positive traits to a lot of the teams competing for against relegation. So yeah, it's a really interesting league last season, and I suppose the evenness in quality where you don't really know what you're going to get in every game is something I absolutely love about that division.
Was there any? I know that there's been sort of a few overarching narratives, I guess, or tactical trends from teams. Did you spot any of that last season? Obviously, Leeds are very dominant, and we know they like to play an expansive game of football. But were there any teams that perhaps approached things with a slightly different tactical view or outlook in terms of the way they went about it and had real success with it?
I think that plays into my previous answer, Connor, in that Norwich, Sheffield United and Leeds were all, in terms of pattern of play, really, really good the previous season. And Aston Villa were as well, but I think the financial stuff has kind of intimated to us the main reason why they ended up sort of getting over the line there. What I will say this season, here comes Gareth Ainsworth, here comes back Paul Warne, we've got Neil Warnock at Middlesbrough, we've got Mick McCarthy and Chris Hughton sitting waiting for jobs. So your transition might be that there might be a few teams that are quite sort of narky to play against. Gab won't mind me saying Aitor Karanka's in as well. He's a hard manager to play against. So is Sabri Lamouchi for Nottingham Forest. I mean, we normally had this conundrum of, this kind of moral nonsense thing of, well, if you pass the ball, that's better. Well, no, not really. If you win, you'll finish higher up than if you lose. So we might get a few more teams that set up to be hard to beat. Neil Harris, Gary Rowett. Actually, that's a good number of managers who are going to make it a little bit harder, I think, for teams like Norwich, Bournemouth, probably going to try and play some passing football.
Neil Warnock, of course, back in the division with Middlesbrough, so you've got to, I think, put them into contention as well. I'll ask you for your perhaps outside bet for this season, which is probably tough to do with the stage we are in terms of recruitment. So we'll probably let you off a little bit if you get it Bradley wrong and have egg on your face in May. Gab, I wanted to ask a general point, and again, this is both of you in terms of the point I made earlier about coverage. Obviously, you guys cover Gab covers the EFL. Ben, you're predominantly the Championship. What do you make of perhaps the coverage that the league gets? Because it kind of felt to me, and I think the last day of the season showed it in the Championship, where it was fairly mainstream and you turned on the radio and it was all there. But beyond that, I mean, it was kind of certainly from Norwich's perspective, when you're out of the division, it kind of feels like you lose all knowledge of it within a couple of months. Do you think it gets the coverage that it deserves as a division, I guess?
Well, personally, I don't see my job to be outing other radio stations and other pundits and other people who cover football. I see it as to provide something different. So I'm kind of a beneficiary, I suppose, of the fact that there isn't much coverage of the Champions League. Because if all the famous ex-footballers and big radio stations were covering it, I would be in the position I am at the moment. So I think, yes, it probably doesn't get much coverage in mainstream newspapers and websites and media and things like that. But I think, also at the same time, it's a great opportunity for sort of up-and-coming journalists and pundits and podcasters to really make a name for themselves, because I think there's more responsibility if you're going to talk on the EFL to actually do a bit of research and have an idea of I suppose, what you're talking about. And I think it's great that there's new people coming into coverage of the EFL.
Do you think we're likely to see more coverage of the Championship, less coverage of the Championship, or do you think it's just going to stay the same once all this is over and fans are back in grounds, Ben?
I mean, I have a lot to say. Gab makes a good point in that, yes, we're quite lucky that we can sweep up a lot of eyeballs and business because other people are watching. Obviously, look, we all sat there very frustrated watching some just idiotic comments about Sheffield United at the start of last season, when literally anyone who knew the slightest thing about the EFL were fully understanding of what a superb team Sheffield United were. And, I think some of the pundits still thought it was Warnock in 2007 that was with them. Obviously, we've lost Villa and we've lost Leeds over the last couple of seasons. In terms of big clubs, I don't necessarily like the term, but in terms of clubs that if they do something, lots of people are interested. You take Leeds out and it's massive, and we lost Villa. Obviously, Norwich coming back down is a well-supported and really a giant in Championship terms, given the amount of promotions that they've had out of there. So we've still got Sheffield Wednesday with their minus 12-point start, Forest and Derby down here. I think it's fantastic. We get a little bit overprotective, and I'm sure Gab was a little bit sitting there like me on the last day when you got that 5-goal swing and 3-point swing within 30 minutes of the end of the season between Swansea, and you got West Brom in pole position, and then Eze saunters through and chips it over the keeper, and we're like, we know he's brilliant. We've been watching him for the last 2 years, but I think it's easy to be a bit snobby about that. We're very proud of some of the players, and I suppose it's nice when people dip in on the last day. But as soon as the Champions League comes on, Connor, they're going to be off. So it's our little home, and the more the merrier. But like Gab says, as long as they're listening to us, we're not worried.
Yeah, that's very true. And you both do provide an excellent service. I'm sure Norwich fans will agree. And I'll get you to speak about sort of your stuff towards the end of it. I'll put a Norwich City slant on this a little bit then. Are you pleased? And it's a slight Premier League question, so forgive me. But are you, it's probably the last one. But are you quite pleased with the way Norwich City approached it? The fact that they didn't throw, the money wasn't there anyway, but the fact they didn't throw a lot of money at it, the fact that they did stick largely with their EFL side. It was at the opening night at Anfield, all 11 players were those who had played in the Championship, and with hindsight, maybe they showed a little bit too loyal or too much loyalty to that squad. But is that something that you're pleased they did as people who cover the Championship? Because it doesn't feel like that a lot of teams who get promoted do stick with the side that got them there. Sheffield United, I guess, are another example. They did largely, didn't they?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of faith. I think the club kind of approached the Premier League with quite a long-term sort of lens, if you like, because I listened to watched your interviews with Stuart Webber, and I don't get the impression he was saying we've got to stay up this season or it's a disaster. Which I think teams like Fulham and people like Aston Villa, who have spent 100 to 150 million on players, have done. So I think in that sense, I would also say though, although you have been loyal to the squad in the main, there's people there like Onel Fernandez, who I think would have made quite a big had he been able to play more. I'm not sure whether Emmett's injury sort of affects him, but I think you can't underestimate his importance in that title-winning season, just because you have the technical players like the Van Fitches and the Buendias and people like that. But I think Hernandez, just his ability to kind of run quickly, even in tight spaces, and create that half a yard for other players around him was pretty valuable. And maybe you missed that a little bit last. Rod Campbell seems like a slightly better.
Well, what do you make of Norwich as they come down, Ben? How do you assess sort of the state that they're in? Because they've got a lot of young assets and we've seen with all the Jamal Lewis speculation in the last 24 hours, and we're recording this on Friday, so goodness knows it could have changed even more by the time this gets released. What do you make of the state they're in? Because it feels like certainly internally they feel like they're in quite a healthy position.
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, aren't you? Like Wolves go up, lose 52 million quid. They're wrong to do that. Villa did it on loans in the same way Fulham and Leeds. The Helder Costa and Jack Harrison, Ilan Meslier were loans. Aston Villa, Tyrone Mings, Axel Tuanzebe, Tammy Abraham, and then Fulham this season, Knockaert, Bobby Reid, and Cavaliero. They all go up with loans and then have to replace their team, and then they're criticised as well. Norwich don't take loans, invest well, and don't spend, and they're criticised as well. So basically, all of the teams that sort of gone up, Brighton got criticised for breaching FFP. Everyone just seems to have a go at these teams when they go up. The truth is, we'll never know. They're, because Norwich did what they did and they did it the way they did it. And all I will say is they come down in a darn sight stronger position, completely 180 from where they were with, at the end of Daniel Farke's first season. So we'll never know. There'll always be an argument to say, if this player had come or that player, and if they'd spent this money. The proof's in the pudding. If they score 95 points again this season, everyone will say, well done, Mr. Webber, very, very clever. If they're ninth in the league, and like we said, the league is predominantly pragmatic teams at the top of the table, everyone will say, they should have spent some money. So I think people are very, very hostile to promoted teams, and they're very happy to be wise after the event. And I don't think we should be criticising a club that has sorted out their finances, got promoted and not gambled, and are now in a very strong position whereby only some very poor operational decisions now would mean they would be anywhere outside the top 3 or 4. So proof's in the pudding, but I think it'd be a bit churlish to criticise them personally.
I'd just like to pick up on Ben's point there. I'm not quite sure that I agree that Norwich would have to make a lot of really bad decisions to be outside the top 3 or 4, because I think if you look at the signings they've made, there tends to be a pretty young profile. I think Gabriel Sutton, who got from Scandinavia, seems to have got some pretty good reviews. He seems like a pretty complete number 6 back there. But I think a lot of the other signings that you've made, Ballymumba, for example, I think would be great pieces of business from a long-term perspective. I wouldn't necessarily be confident in saying, yes, those are the type of players definitely going to get Norwich into the top 6. So I think I've got a feeling that if Norwich are in the 7th, 10th range for much of the season and playing good football and being the best team in a lot of games, I still think that the club will see it as, yes, we're sort of getting towards where we want to go. So I don't know how strong the expectation is from a short term. I maybe disagree on.
Can I just qualify what I would class as a bad operational decision, Gab, as in firing your manager or selling maybe 3 of the wrong players at the wrong price, if you know what I mean? That's what I would. Yeah. That's what I would class as a very bad operational decision. But I take your point.
Norwich are in an interesting position because we can talk about all the good work they've done financially. They opted to use the Premier League money to invest in the training ground and improve facilities there. And you guys probably haven't been to Colney, but it's chalk and cheese compared to last season where it's predominantly porter cabins. Now they've got 2 lovely new buildings and it feels much more professional and it looks a lot better as well. But actually they're coming down on the back of 10 straight Premier League defeats, 21 points, and a side with a losing mentality. So it's a difficult juggling act to sort of to juggle, I guess. How do you view where Norwich City are at the moment? Because it's difficult perhaps to compare them with Bournemouth in terms of certainly off the pitch, but on it feels like they're in a little bit of free fall. So how big a task is this now for Daniel Farke and Stuart Webber, and what can they learn, I guess, from other teams who have been relegated and who've been in free fall as well?
Well, what I would say first is, as we sit here right now, I'd much rather be a Norwich fan than a Bournemouth fan or a Watford fan, on the basis my teams would actually have a manager in place and be some way along some kind of plan. What's an interesting point, and you'd know more about this than me, Connor, is would 10 straight defeats matter if half the team's going to be different and the expectation, like we said, is going to be totally different? I know perhaps a good comparison would be Huddersfield, who actually absolutely stunk out the Premier League in their last season. However, they then changed ownership and gave all the parachute payments to the new owner. And then look at the stability that Norwich. I know 6 players have come in, and Gab rightly says that, well, we might not even see, some of them might even just be loaned out again. We might not even see some of them on the pitch. But I've contended, I mean, it's a bit of a soundbite, but I've been asked the question a lot. I've contended that if any three out of Buendia, Pukki, Aarons, Farker and Webber are still there, Norwich should be in the, you know, maybe I'll be less harsh, the top four at least, let alone the top two. So what I would say, Connor, is who's going to beat them? If that's the case, I mean, obviously Brentford improved year on year. Forest had a good season, but slipped down to 7th. Derby, everyone expects to be a bit higher up with their younger players. Well, Preston, one player goes out and they improve kind of very, very slowly. But you know, who finishes above these three relegated teams? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is, again, a point I wanted to get both of your opinions on in terms of the strength of the division that Norwich City are going into, because there have been a few Norwich City supporters, and I think it's probably the same for any club after they get relegated, right, where they suddenly go from being a relatively small fish to quite a big fish, having played in the Premier League. You're the team that everyone wants to beat, aren't you, I guess? How strong is the division that Norwich City are coming into? Because I think the perception is certainly amongst Norwich fans that the division probably isn't as strong as it was a couple of years ago. I'll come to Gab first on that.
Yeah, I think it depends how you define as strong. I think you're not going to be competing with a Newcastle or who sort of had far too much money to spend for this level, and then Wolves who had both internationals investment. So I don't think there's going to necessarily be any standout teams. I think Swansea have obviously lost their loanees, and I don't necessarily know how sustainable that's going to be. They're going to need to make sure that the quality of their loanees stays the same, because I think other than that, their squad isn't necessarily that great, and I think it was sort of Brewster and Gallagher coming in really elevated. So I think that's quite a big factor. And then there's other teams as well. Brentford, Brentford have progressed year on year, as Ben have suggested, and I would be very surprised if they're not in the top 6. Other than that, I think there's question marks over pretty much everyone in terms of the promotion picture. So I think in terms of the promotion picture, it could be a little bit weaker than recent years, but at the same time, I don't think there's any team that you'll be able to sort of beat. That makes it really interesting.
Ben, what do you make of the division that Norwich City are walking into? Obviously, lost Leeds, West Brom, and Fulham. Gained Norwich, Bournemouth and Watford. Of course, lost Wigan and Hull, who have difficulty themselves. Charlton as well, you'd throw into that. But Coventry, I thought, look, I went to watch them last season to go and watch Sam McCallum. It was only for one game, but really liked what they were trying to do with the three at the back. And then Rotherham and Wickham, who I don't think anyone's going to enjoy playing against, really. And you've suggested we might see a bit more of a pragmatic division, but do you think it'll be as strong, perhaps, as we've seen in recent years? I mean, you mentioned the 3 teams there. It's quite difficult, I guess, particularly with the relegated teams, I think, this year, to pinpoint one that perhaps stands out.
Well, Gab made a really good point, because we went into this season knowing that Leeds were going to be really good. We already knew that before anyone kicked the ball. Maybe we know that about Brentford, but then if you take out Ben Rama, Rico Henry, I don't know, name one or other of about another 7 of their excellent players that could go out. I always look at the parachute teams because they have that financial advantage. So you have got Stoke, who have been just dreadful for 2 seasons. There is no way that they should be finishing anywhere near the bottom half of the table with the squad, with Bet365 and with a year 3 parachute payment. Huddersfield, I think possibly you can tick off because, you know, that money seems to be going to new owners, although expect them to go to Leeds now with Carlos Carver on for some loan players. And it's quite amusing when you ask Leeds fans, because I say, they'll want Shackleton and Struich, and the Leeds fans say, no, they're going to be in the first team squad. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're not going to want your 17-year-olds, put it that way, if there's a deal being set up. Cardiff could be dangerous, but weight of expectation on Neil Harris. He's never managed this high up with this expectation. I agree with Gab about Swansea. Their owners are not remotely interested in investing any money, and the real big, strong pattern there intimates to me that Swansea will finish lower than 6th place next season. So, yeah, very open. I mean, Gab can smarten you up a bit more on Wickham, Rotherham and Coventry, but we've had this conversation many times when you're comparing. Even do it with substitute benches where you can probably pick one Watford, Norwich or Bournemouth player that could fund the entire Wycombe first 11. And you see the mass, particularly you'll see with Wycombe, the mass disparity there. Coventry will be all right, actually, like you said, because they play some good football. But look, we do this every year. We make the relegated teams massive fa'vorites, and then one of them's in the bottom three with 15 games gone or something. So who knows? I'd be interested in Gav's thoughts. I have quite a liking for Derby. I think Derby might sell Jayden Bogle, but keep Sibley, Bird, Lowe, Whittaker, who you're going to hear all about, who are some excellent young players. And just on one other point, Gav mentioned Ryan Brewster, who is the new Tammy Abraham now. Whichever club gets him on loan, well, they're going to have a good season, is what I would say.
I think he'll go to the Premier League himself. Yeah,
Abraham didn't he? He went to Swansea for a year and then came back down with Villa. But, okay, I'll rephrase my point, Gab. If a Championship club can get Ryan Brewster, then ka-ching for a good season. I think there'll be a long queue for him and Mr. Van der Horn as well, which I'm sure you've been researching, Connor, with your Norwich hat on, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly given that I think Norwich are probably in the market for a centre-back as well. He does seem to tick a lot of boxes, but whether they have the financial muscle or not, we'll see. I just want to pick up on a point you made there, Ben, in terms of the teams that have got relegated from the Premier League and have got it quite wrong. And we've seen a few. I was looking at the bottom half of the Championship now. You've got Middlesbrough, QPR, Stoke. Wigan and Hull have obviously had their issues with ownership and whatnot. But Huddersfield, probably a bit harsh to chuck Swansea into that, given they finished sixth. But as you said there, they've had their issues as well. These are all clubs that have been in the Premier League fairly recently and have almost kind of plateaued in the Championship. What lessons do Norwich City need to learn from those clubs about how not to do it when they come back down? Let's go to Gav first.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think it's really important that after relegation, there's strong leadership in place. I don't think Huddersfield had that when they came down initially, when they had Sievert and Hudson, who are both very inexperienced coaches, and actually Danny Cowley did a massive job for them just as that pragmatism, that sense of leadership. He's been a manager and brilliantly everywhere. He's been in the lower leagues. So I think that's a factor, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what we see from Daniel Farke, because I was watching the TNC video after Norwich City had just been relegated, and now we're not going to, I think Chris Reeve was probably a bit sort of great at the time, which would be after you've just been relegated, and I think there's question marks over the leadership where Norwich City are losing and Daniel Farke is very composed on the touchline. He doesn't show his emotions, and that was in the interest of balance, that was the same in title-winning season when a goal would go in and then Daniel Farke would you could see the emotion sort of within him, but you could see that he was kind of holding it in, kind of thing. So what he doesn't express his emotions. It's like he tries to stay on an even keel, and just after a run of 10 straight defeats, I think the big question is, can he show the leadership qualities required? Can he get a reaction out of his players? That's something I'm really looking forward to seeing.
So Gab said leadership. Ben, what would you throw into that? What do Norwich City need to not do now they've...
I'm getting very excited and nodding along with Gab there. Here comes the soundbite. Owners relegate clubs, particularly from the Championship. So Huddersfield struggled. Well, they changed ownership, didn't they, and spent their parachutes there. West Brom, well, they ruthlessly sacked Darren Moore, spent £3 million a year on Slaven Bilic, and whoop-de-doo, they're in the Premier League again. Stoke, when I talk about bad operational decisions, went with Gary Rowett, then with Nathan Jones for virtually a season of relegation form. Fortunately, overlapping 2 seasons there. So operationally, they got it wrong. Swansea, I think Graham Potter and Steve Cooper and some good sales have bailed those American owners out of not investing any money. They don't care. Middlesbrough, again, operational. Gary Monk for 3 months, and then sadly Tony Pulis, and it just didn't work for him. Sunderland, need I say any more? Look where the hell they are. Hull, need I say any more? What I'm saying is, if you come down, and Gab's right, he uses the word leadership, if you come down with stable ownership and a plan and 2 years of parachute money, you should be looking okay. And the glaring one is Stoke, isn't it? Where clever old me with my list of arguments doesn't have one for that because it was Gary Rowett, like I said, Nathan Jones, and they should still be challenging. They're the ones that have kind of, and I suppose Middlesbrough to an extent, have kind of backed up the manager. And look, sometimes you have an advantage and you don't use it, and you fail. And sometimes you come up against Chris Wilder, Daniel Farke, and Marcelo Bielsa against you in one season, don't you? And Dean Smith with Jack Grealish in midfield as well. So, and again, there's another team that went down and nearly. Villa, I think personally, is too big never to have anyone come in and bail them out. Someone's always going to do that. Yeah. But that's what, and I'm glad we came to. That's what I was talking about in terms of bad operational decisions. What I should have said is cataclysmically stupid operational decisions, which Norwich are just not going to do.
Yeah, well, I think what you guys have said there will probably give Norwich fans some optimism, given that they essentially are entering back into the Championship with the same sort of hierarchy, I guess, as they left it with, Daniel Farke and Stuart Webber. I just wonder if we'll see an evolution in terms of Norwich City, in terms of the style in which they play, given what we've seen. I mean, Sorensen, very physical player. Kieran Downer, he's not the most physical, but still 6 foot. And we've seen, obviously, Marco Stiepermann in that 10 position as well. Recruitment is obviously key. Norwich City have proven that. If you don't have a lot of money, it's key you get the recruitment right. I know you guys probably aren't going to, as is the rest of us, know too much about Pueta or Sorensen, given that they've been playing in Denmark and Poland respectively. But just on the domestic signings that Norwich City have made, Ballymumba, Kieran Dow, Sam McCallum as well. Probably a question for you, Gab, really. Those 3 players, are you impressed that Norwich City have signed those players? I mean, Mumba and McCallum were probably speaking about potential, but Kieran Dow, where do you see him fitting into Norwich City's starting lineup?
Yeah, so Kieran Dowell, I think he made his debut at Everton a few years ago and produced a really good form. I think it might have been against yourselves, actually, when you were already relegated on the final day, like
probably.
Or something. But yeah, he's a really energetic player. He's kind of had some mixed loan spells. Did really well at Nottingham Forest. I think that was his first Championship loan spell. 1 or 2 struggled to get in the Sheffield United side over people like Mark Duffy, and then Derby, I think, as well. Didn't do too much there, but then he's come in at Wigan, and he's a really energetic player. So he's going to be one of the midfield 3 that's going to really sort of push up alongside and sometimes ahead of the main striker. But he can also strike a ball from range, so I'd be really excited about him. Ballymumba, I'm not too sure about. I don't necessarily know. I mean, he was started out as a midfielder. I think he's been playing right back for Sunderland under 23s from the people I've spoken to, and that's where you've been planning for him. I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on him performing well at right back at this level every week, so that's one I'll have to sort of keep an eye out for. But then there's Sam McCallum as well, who seems very similar stylistically to Jamal Lewis. So the interesting thing as well, actually, is did a little bit of digging on this Pacheco lad, and he seems like quite a classic left winger in the sense that he's very quick, and I think he is left footed. So it's going to be interesting to see what sort of system you go with Eden as well. So yeah, my thoughts on the signing.
Yeah, Pueta's an interesting one because he has a lot of pace. I spoke to a scout with the Polish FA when he signed, and some of his records in terms of speed are incredible. We're talking Usain Bolt level over about 30 metres, I think,
Right.
but just lightning quick. But some issues around sort of his technical proficiency, which perhaps you wouldn't associate with Norwich City necessarily. And I just wonder, given Norwich City will probably look to dominate the ball again. I think the fundamentals of Daniel Farke's system will be the same. It's going to be interesting to see how they slot in a rapid left winger into a side that is going to dominate the ball and probably have a lot of the ball inside their opponent's half. But that will be interesting to see. Ben, just coming to you, Norwich City. We saw them under Alex Neil. They opted for continuity, kept a lot of the squad, kept the manager last time. This season, it kind of feels like they've been given a choice of either you change the personnel or you change the manager. And it kind of feels like they're going down the route of changing the squad. Leitner, Tribal, two sort of key names in that championship title winning season who both have basically been told they can leave the club. How important is it that Norwich City changed their mentality from one that was losing every week to a team that needs to win every week? And we've spoken about expectation. I think there probably will be expectation, certainly from the supporters on Norwich City this season. I think most will probably deem a top six finish probably the bare minimum, to be completely honest. And if we think about that, those 2 seasons under Daniel Farke and Stuart Webber, they were both without expectation. So for me, mentality is going to be crucial this year. How do Norwich City and Daniel Farke switch a losing mentality into a winning one, Ben?
Well, Norwich as a club and their fans are very comfortable with being in the Championship. They know, as I said, that they're a Championship giant. I mean, we're going to start to be looking at points and things, and I know they've now got the record for relegations, but they could very soon have the record for promotions as well. So maybe it suits Norwich to be at the top of the Championship. Maybe it's easier for them with their size, and they've either had Premier League TV money or parachute money, and then ironically the one year they don't have parachute money is the year that they then had the madcap season in 18-19. Look, we all saw the pattern of play in 2018-19. It was unstoppable in the Championship. So one would assume that if you can develop that usage of the ball, that level of rotation, and I mean, let's be honest, it was all out attack. I mean, and again, we talk about Premier League coverage. We all knew Norwich couldn't defend before they went up because they just attacked for the entire season, didn't they? And had these sort of 3 very good young players who'd done about 20 minutes defending in their careers between the 3 of them because they were attacking for the whole season, weren't they? So I do wonder whether this narrative we've talked about that it might come up against some harder nuts to crack this season in terms of, I don't know, Wickham at Carrow Road, where Wickham will take 0-0 and not get on the bus before stick some throw-ins and some corners in and be physical. Nothing against that. They've just got promoted. Good luck to them. But one would think that pattern of play should be absolutely fine, which is why I would find it absolutely befuddling to not have Daniel Farke there on the sidelines doing the exact same thing. Really quickly, just on the recruitment, the only thing I would be worried about in terms of Norwich would be the impact of the sales rather than the impact of the signings, because Stuart Webber has proved over and again he can tool up a team and get promoted out of the Championship. What we're going to find out is, was the 18-19 predicated on a brilliant pattern of play, some brilliant players, or a bit of both? Now, Norwich fans will hope that it was pattern of play because possibly Buendia, the best player at Aarons or Pukki, may not be there. If they got promoted on the basis of having 3 outstanding players down the right-hand side of their team who all played well all season and were incredible, and all of a sudden they're gone, and the sum of those parts or what have you then completely undermines the pattern of play, then is where you might get found out. But I suspect, as with most of these things, there's a grey area where it wasn't all Buendia and it wasn't all Farke, and it was a good pattern of play with some very good players. But remember, you cannot take the best players out of a team and expect them to be just as good if you don't replace them with either, equally good players in respect of the sum of the parts of the team or good individuals.
This is the question I was going to come on to you both, because Norwich obviously have 5 who will probably be very highly sought after this summer, and that's their young talent: Max Aarons, Jamal Lewis, Todd Cantwell, who we didn't see a lot of in the Championship, to be completely honest, but has completely excelled and probably surpassed everyone's expectations in the Premier League, Ben Godfrey and Emi Buendia. Now, Norwich aren't going to sell all of those. They'll probably, I think, from what we've gathered, that probably Aarons and Buendia are probably the most likely to leave. Obviously, Jamal Lewis and the Liverpool links has thrown a spanner into the works a little bit. But you said there Norwich need to replace those players if they do go. If we're talking about 3 of those young players that do go, that's a hell of a lot of responsibility, I guess, to put onto the recruitment staff, isn't it, Gav, to replace those, given that we know Norwich City won't go out and spend a lot of money?
Yeah, but I think it seems like you've already rejuvenated the squad already. There's always been, the transfer business has been pretty swift. Even during the season, you brought Canaries in, I think, during the lockdown, and then a lot of players that have come in straight after, even before the Man City game where you finished. So I think from that point of view, they've had their eye. They've been very aware of what they're going to need going into the Championship, and it's going to be really interesting to see how some of these players come together. Interesting to see whether Timu Pukki stays as well, and whether you get another striker in. I think that's going to be quite a big issue. I know I've seen glimpses of Daniel Adamide after the restart, and he's looked pretty quick, decent body strength, but I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on him starting every week. So I think replacing Timu Pukki is going to be on all, keeping Timu Pukki either way. Got to make sure that you do the right business in that attacking area. Sure.
Yeah, Timu Pukki is an interesting one. He's probably not the Timu Pukki that you remember. He hasn't scored a goal in open play since December. He's obviously, it feels like there are a few people questioning him now. He's obviously been on a bit of a goal drought. I don't think he's scored since February, and that was a penalty against Tottenham in the league. So it's a very different Timu Pukki. But if one rebounds into his path, you never know. Ben, just in terms of those 5 players that our clubs are going to want, and we've seen that with Liverpool and Jamal Lewis, and that saga rumbles on. How do Norwich City get the balance between ensuring that if they do let some of those young players go, that those remaining at the club aren't then annoyed that they haven't been given the opportunity to move on as well? Because we've seen this with relegated teams in the past, and again, Norwich are probably a very good example of this in the past under Alex Neil, where players come down perhaps and their heart isn't quite in getting the club back up to the Premier League.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. It's something that can be got wrong, definitely, because even though Norwich do seem to be financially stable, they don't want to get into a situation where, for example, you've got players being linked with, Premier League champions or Atletico Madrid or whoever, and they're rejecting bids, and all of a sudden you've got players that want to leave and a club that's not wanting to sell them, and there's a point where you do say, okay, what are we losing here? We get 20 million instead of 25 million, and we keep the dressing room and we keep everything working together properly. So that'll be interesting. And I'm glad Gab mentioned Pukki as well, because Norwich don't get promoted in 18-19 without Pukki, do they? He was incredible, wasn't it? 29 goals, and Mitrovic got 26 and Watkins 25 this season. So nobody gets 30 goals in the Championship anymore. I think Glenn Murray's done it, and that's about it for the last probably, someone will fact check me on that, won't they? But probably about the last 15 years. I can only remember Glenn Murray getting up to that total. So it's so tricky. I agree with you, because I saw you at that Wigan game when you were getting promoted, Connor, and I remember watching Cantwell, and I was totally wrong. I thought, he's they'll go up, he'll get loaned out to Derby like Kieran Dowell did pretty much, and he's been fantastic. So I think that's a bit of a bonus for Norwich, to be honest. And I've heard plenty of good arguments that Cantwell is probably more suited to playing in the Premier League than he actually is in the Championship. So It never. All I'll say is it never works out the way you want it to. You probably think, just shift out Lewis and Godfrey, get a ton of money in, and keep the others. Never works out that way. That they always want your best players, and they always want to spend less than you want to receive to have them. I would just be worried if those Pukki goals. Buendia could probably play top 6, top 8 Premier League anyway, couldn't he? And Aaron's just in terms of balance and creativity. And, this was before Klopp's, same time as Klopp's Liverpool, but fullbacks being a massive part of the attacking plan. And I don't know what you guys think. I think Aaron's is way above. Lewis is a good player, but I think Aaron's is very, very good. So, can easily go wrong, but would you rather be sitting on these massive assets ready to cash in and having money to spend, or hoping that James Maddison's knee isn't too badly hurt so you can sell and, you know, not get relegated from the Championship? So.
Right, I'll ask you both a very quick question, and then I'll ask you two more, and then we'll be good. Out of those young players that we've spoken about, who do you think will hurt Norwich the most if they do depart? Let's start with Gab.
For me, I would say I'm torn between Buendia and Aarons. I think with Godfrey, I don't think Clark sees him as a central midfielder, even though I saw him have a brilliant season at Shrewsbury in that position, but maybe not quite technical enough to be a number 6 for Parker. And as a centre back, if you're talking Premier League level, I don't know if he's quite there. Jamal Lewis as well, if I'm not mistaken, he had his injury issues last season and hit and miss as well. So I don't think either of, I'd feel confident in finding a replacement for either of those players. Still think we need to strengthen in those positions anyway. So I think I'm going to have a cop out here and say somewhere between Aarons and Buendia.
What about you, Ben?
Buendia, I think. I think you have a player there at Championship level where, you're not playing well, can just win you the game, can't he? Whereas, Pookie needs supply, Aarons is a right back, Godfrey's a defender, Lewis is a defender, and Cantwell needs stuff to run onto, doesn't he? So I think Buendia, who we've seen Hernandez and Grealish in the Championship, just be too good for it and make a difference so often. Then I would say that, despite the fact you're all expecting to be without him anyway, aren't you? So I think that expectation's already been met, which is about half the battle, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Right, final couple then, and we'll try and make these relatively quick fire, although feel free to expand. Let's go for maybe a club who you think is like a one to watch, a dark horse in the race next season. And obviously, as I said at the top end of the show, it's very difficult to do it at this stage, given we don't know what the squads are going to look like. And again, everything changes so quickly, doesn't it? And Bournemouth and Watford obviously haven't got managers. But who do you think could upset the apple cart a little bit and maybe push for promotion? Gab, let's start with you.
Well, I'm not going to make this an official prediction. I'm doing this later in the summer, but what I will say is I have got my eye on Millwall because I like Gary Rowett. I know as a Birmingham fan, he's very good at organising teams, and he's certainly done that with Millwall. He settled on like a kind of 5-3-2-3 formation that worked for him very well this season. We're thinking he might play 4 at the back a bit more next season in home games, but I just think he's kind of got balance really, because his defence has been very strong. We've got a good goalkeeper in Barkowski, who Ben knows about, but I also think he's shown that ability to kind of adapt the way he plays, and there's been a couple of games where he's actually played 2 technical midfielders in the 2 in midfield, which wouldn't necessarily have associated with Rowett beforehand. So I think if you can keep that evolution, then maybe Millwall could upset the odds. But yeah, it all depends on who they can bring in.
Off you go, Ben. Who's your one to watch for the season coming up?
In terms of a dark horse, because you can't really call Brentford a dark horse. You can't call any of the parachute teams a dark horse. If Bristol City get the right managerial hire, I think that's a really, really good job, because their recruitment's been good and they've sold well. Derby could have 3 good young players all improve at the same time, the same way Norwich did. I tell you who's going to be fun is Barnsley, and you Norwich fans won't have seen Gerhard Struber and all the Austrian boys. They're gonna be a lot of fun, and I wouldn't be surprised. They could finish in the middle of the table and have 0 goal difference, but score 75 and concede 75 or something like that. But I think they could be quite interesting. And look, I had Forest to do really well in the playoffs because I thought they had a really clever manager. But and Gab's Millwall shout is good. It seems to be the right match for Gary Rowett, but of course these are all dark horses compared to these relegated Premier League teams with parachute money.
I think mine would be Coventry, but then I'm slightly biased given that Mark Robbins is the manager, I guess. Let's finally sort of ask you to not predict, but maybe outline how you think Norwich City could do this season, knowing what we know at the moment, and obviously without the full picture in terms of incomings and outgoings. Do you think this could be a season where Norwich City do challenge, or do you actually anticipate it being a little bit more or a little more difficult, I guess, than perhaps some supporters would hope and probably think? And whoever wants to lead on that.
Do you want to go first, Gab?
Sure, yeah. I know Norwich. I know you said, Connor, that top 6 is the minimum expectation. Personally, I wouldn't necessarily quite look at it like that. I think that you'll be in the mix for promotion and in the mix for the playoffs, but I'm not confident as such that you'll be sort of right up there among that top 2. I think it could be more of a playoff push than an automatic promotion push. I see it at the moment. That could all change depending on who you bring in, and after that. So I think the rest of the recruitment could be telling, and the outgoings as well.
Ben, how do you see this season panning out for Norwich?
I was just trying to scribble the team down really, really quickly. And I mean, you assume that Krul, Zimmerman, Hanley will all be retained. Byron McCallum might well be the centre backs. You'd assume Sørensen has been signed to start in central midfield. And then, like Gab said, you want the Dowell that was at Wigan, not the Dowell that was at Derby. I just think, I'll repeat it again, Pukki, Buendia, Aarons, can you keep 1 or 2 of those? I mean, look, if they kept all 3 of those, I'd say Norwich will score over 90 points and finish in the top 2. But if all 3 of those go, then you start to look at the team and you think, oh, okay, not quite what it was. But I disagree slightly with Gab. I think that they should be in that top 6 with Farker and Webber there. But that might be me being an Ipswich fan, just loading it on, so I'm not disappointed when they are there. Yeah.
Yeah, quite possibly. Gents, thank you very much for your time and for your insight. Let's just finish off by letting people know where they can find you, and I'll put all your links and stuff in the description so they can find you. But Gab, first and foremost, where can people find your stuff if they want to read or view more of you?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter @_football lab, and through that account I'll post sort of EFL tweets and also Smart for various websites. So @_football lab for me.
And Benjamin, I'm sure everyone's familiar with your work, but for those who haven't seen you before, where can they find you?
They can find me on YouTube. Just type Benjamin Bloom into YouTube. Bit of a weird time for me. I have no job now thanks to COVID. So I'm really hammering YouTube. I'd love to be able to do this like you guys do, sort of as a living. So Patreon, if you want to support me financially, patreon.com/Benjamin Bloom. If not, just go on YouTube and watch every single one of my videos and like every single one. But hopefully we'll be in the stadiums, and I'll be Norwich, and I'm sure I'll be down at Birmingham watching either Coventry or Birmingham with Gab at some point. But yes, it's going to be great. And welcome back, Norwich. And it was fab last time. I had a really good rapport with all the Norwich fans. So do come back.
To say as well, if I can, I think you do a fantastic job here on PinkUn, and I really enjoy reading your stuff. So yeah, keep up the great work.
Thank you, mate. And these two, of course, are both brilliant EFL contributors. You should check them out next season. They're definitely worth following and subscribing as Norwich try and navigate their way through the Championship season, not just on Norwich, but also in Ben's case on the Championship, and in Gab's case on the EFL, both beacons of knowledge. So well worth checking them out. Guys, thank you very much for joining me. Maybe we'll do this again at some point. Thank you very much for watching. If you have liked the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the PinkUn YouTube channel. And of course, if you are listening to this as a podcast, then leave us a review. Why not? It'd be great for me to hear from you. And of course, you can get in contact with us on all the usual channels. PinkUn.com, the place to go for the latest Norwich City news. I think that's just about it, guys. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all again very, very soon.